I guess we're going to start out by talking about like how we started working together, talking about the mothership connection, or the mother box connection, excuse me, not the mothership connection, but the mother box connection. The work that we've been doing with Black Kirby, just to kind of like do an overview, like Black Kirby is the collaborative entity that Stacey Robinson and I have started to kind of like just deal with some of these issues around, you know, using the comics medium as a way to kind of like deal with some of these issues around representation and social justice and storytelling. So, but I'll let Stacey kick off like just some of the things that we, probably how we start working together, and then we'll just kind of go through the talk and look at some of Jack Kirby's influences and you know, just some of the works and some of the comparisons of stuff between his work and some of the things we're trying to do with it. So,
how we started? Well, we met in 2006
right.
At ECBAC, East Coast Black Age of Comics Convention. Seated next to each other, and I fronted on a project that he told me. this is what made us actually start working together. He told me to send him some work for a project that he was a catalog that he was putting together, and I kind of it's like, okay, it probably won't happen, so I won't worry about it. And it published, and it published. And I said, oh wow, so he must have gotten some of my work. And I looked through it several times. There's no work in there, so. To this day, that's what made me remember. If John says he's going to do something, it's going to happen. So a few years later, we met at another convention, and here, actually, OnyxCon, the first OnyxCon, right?
Oh, yeah, one.
Okay, and for some reason, seating was not, it did not work out, and we got placed together, like in the back somewhere. On the stage, right. And but it allowed, what happened was, it was a blessing because it allowed us to talk and politic all day. Like, that's what we did all day. So from there, we talked about a lot of ideas, realized that we had a lot in common, and decided to eventually work together on some stuff. And since then, we've just been tiering projects and working on things. I think this is our first major collaboration. And we were talking about Jack Kirby. We were talking about what happened to him after he died, and some of the things that are arguable about proceeds and residuals, things of that nature, that should have been awarded to him, arguably. But we decided to actually comment on that and combine that with the idea of his mythos and counter. Because that's what we do as Black creators. We counter the movement that's already been established. So we actually decided to make work that actually dealt with all these layers of issues.
So let me kind of get started. Like, I'm assuming that most people know who Jack Kirby. Show of hands who know who Jack Kirby was. Pretty like
no, Jack
relatively.
No.
You know who Stan Lee was?
Yeah.
Sorry, you're still here. Okay. Right. Anyway, so Jack Kirby, you know, born Jakob Kurtzberg, is probably one of the most like prolific comics creators in the history of the medium, and actually co-created Captain America, the Avengers, the X-Men, a lot of the Hulk actually too. A lot of the really popular Marvel comics that are getting some, you know, a lot of shine now in films. If you look at like the new Iron Man 3 movie that just came out, for instance, he co-created Iron Man, right? And he was kind of the silent partner of Stan Lee. So Stan Lee actually, or born Stanley Lieber, right, is you know, he's a writer, creator. He's also kind of, you know, the front man, the voice of Marvel Comics for many years. You know, in his lifetime, Jack Kirby drew about 25,000 pages of comics and created genres. For instance, he created the romance genre, and actually probably like co-created the whole like horror anthology genre as well. The first one that he worked on was called Black Magic, and actually had a black romance comic that he wanted to do that actually never really got off the ground. But anyway, he was very inventive, and as Stacey was talking about, created his own mythopoetic as far as like how he dealt with like just restructuring mythology and stuff. And a lot of the work that he did has influenced a lot of like the Black Age of Comics creators, you know. And I've heard people talk about his work, you know, as far as like the Incredible Hulk. And the first thing I ever tried to draw was Thor, you know, because I used to read like a lot of Norse mythology. And so to see like, my mom bought me like the Mighty Thor when I was a kid, and I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. It's like just, this is Norse mythology, but kind of cooler, you know, you know, what's going on with it? You know, so that's kind of like how I first saw his work. And at first, you know, as a kid, and I think probably Stacey echoes this too, I didn't really like his work, you know. I was used to like the, you know, George Tuska or like the John Burns work, or you know, Terry Austin's work, or even like Neil Adams' work. There was like a lot more, you know, realistic, you know, quote unquote realistic as far as like comics go. And so Jack Kirby's really bold forms that kind of broke outside the space and actually kind of abstracted the human form even more. Didn't realize that we were looking at pretty much like a modern artist working in the comics medium, right? And so that's kind of what the show is looking at to a certain degree, some of these pieces. But yeah, this is just some of the characters. It's created Silver Surfer. I mean, it's just, the list goes on and on, right? Of course, you know, Kirby co-created the Black Panther as well with Stan Lee, and like 4 months before the organization that would be called the Black Panther Party, like actually called itself that, right? So some of the things that we were looking at were kind of making those kind of like implications a lot more explicit, those connections a lot more explicit. Like, oh, you know, so it was kind of like, what if Jack Kirby was, you know, this brother, you know, this black creator, what would he be creating, you know, through kind of like an Afrocentric lens? What are some of the worlds that would be like made, you know? And so we're thinking about, again, like he was always concerned, it seems, with various types of mythologies, right? Like this notion of the sublime, you know, that would come out in some of the more ethereal work that he would do. Like, so he looked at gods and goddesses quite a bit, but also he was very interested in like different types of like modern art movements, and he was a collage artist also, which I thought a lot of people don't realize. He actually did like a lot of really beautiful collage work. Was highly influenced by like modern art and pop art. And this is actually from a series that he would call, it's called The Faces of God. You know, it's like he was trying to draw God, you know, try to draw like entities, you know, that represented, you know, these connections to, you know, to like different types of like power structures outside of ourselves. And there's this really great book called Hand of Fire that just came out last year, and it looks at like one particular chapter that affected me was this chapter called Sublime Technology. So because Kirby would do like these crazy, like intricate, like, you know, pieces of technology that did these like really like simple functions, and actually, you know, almost like Rube Goldberg machines to a certain degree, you know, where if you've seen his work, where it would like just do all this crazy cause and effect things, actually, you know, stir some coffee or something. You know? But you know, there were these massive structures, and so he was just making up worlds, and actually created some of the conventions of how we even think about, you know, creating characters, you know, or the superhero, and for good or ill, you know, he's helped create the way that we tell stories in the superhero genre and in comics. Right? And these are some of the examples of Kirby's work. You know, just some of, and we can see some of the structures that he's doing. Some of these things. It's great. I'm looking down here. Anyway, but yeah, but here's some of the structures. He worked on a lot of mediums too. You know, pen and ink, acrylic, and actually created some really pretty wild characters like Omak, the one-man army, and Kamandi, the last boy on Earth, and things like the demon. You know, and all these different types of like really elaborate, you know, mythical worlds. You know?
But he structured the way that, like, as John said earlier, he structured the way that we think about comics, that we think about characters, world building, and things as black creators. But as black creators, we counter the movement with our own creations. And the way that we do that is interesting because it's still built on Kirby's construct. It's still built on his template, even though we're countering it.
Yeah, and so I think what was happening was when we started sitting and thinking about, you know, working together. This is actually one of the first pieces that we did together. Stacey actually created this this collage for a character that I created called the Dire Collector. It's one of my stories I'm working on. And so this is actually the first collaborative piece of thing we did together, right? ourselves, doing the writing and doing everything by ourselves. So I really became like kind of addicted to collaboration since I've been working with my partner, Damien Duffy, for like, what, 7 years, something like that. But I'm always looking to, to find other ways to, to work together. I found that Stacey and I, like you said earlier, we actually had like a lot of things in common as far as the coming from the hip hop generation, and actually thinking about like politically where we were. Our styles are, and I want to show you, because we're with a stylistic comparison, but our styles are like very different, but also thematically kind of overlap. And so, yeah, and I think after talking about the work, we started really trusting each other's process, how we think about the work. So, the fantastic blackness piece that happened was a colleague of ours named Dr. Ali from who did this book called Super Black, and he also wrote this book called Black Space, that's looking at black presence in like science fiction and actually in black superheroes. And he put together this piece called Fantastic Blackness. It's going to be a show of like independent comics, loosely based off of the black comics book that Damien and I did. And immediately when he said Fantastic Blackness, I said, oh, yeah, like the Fantastic Four. And so I immediately started to look for the typeface that actually, this is actually based off of the Fantastic Four logo, and it's a typeface. So actually, like, as a designer, I just kind of started working with the logo. And this is around the same time that, as Stacey was saying earlier, that this discrepancy between like the Kirby family was happening with the Disney outfit, as far as like getting remuneration for some of like Kirby's, creations. And so we started having these talks about it, and then I started doing these posters that were, based off of Kirby's images and stuff, right? So this is a character that we ended up calling Major Sankofa, right? And it's obviously based off of one of Jack Kirby's like classic Captain America poses from Mind Bomb. This is when he first started working for Marvel again, because he actually leaves Marvel like in the I want to say it was like what, the early 70s, yeah, something like that. Yeah, and he started. He was a DC Comics gave him kind of free reign to create a whole world of creations there. But that kind of goes sour, and it goes back to Marvel to work, in like the late 70s on a lot of these pieces as well. And so creating a character like Major Sankofa that kind of like echoes physically some of the things that's going on with Captain America, but also having like these different attributes. For instance, the Sankofa idea of like going back and getting history and representing it in the present. I mean, that's kind of what Captain America is, right? He's a living anachronism, where he's a man out of time, trying to actually create an America that he actually used to live in, but also having a disconnect or with what's actually happening in the 1960s when he's actually revived, by the Avengers and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of like esoteric like intertextuality going on too. But formally, we try to make like these things like really interesting visually, but then also inundated with a lot of like intertextual, even intergenerational information that's going on in work. So.
And the comics medium is just perfect for that. It just fits that format so well.
Right, and also, I said that we're both from the like really huge fans of hip hop culture as well, and graffiti. And actually, when I was looking at Stacey's work when we were on the stage at OnyxCon, he showed me a lot of his like graffiti work and some of his tag work and just like work that's inspired by graffiti culture. And I was like blown away by it. I was like, why don't you show this? He just had it in a portfolio. I was like, this is amazing stuff. So. This notion of like working together just became like really apparent, and so we started talking about this issue, and we'll get back to it later. But I'm just showing like some of the comparisons because I love showing like the before and afters. Like this is actually Big Barda, which is one of Jack Kirby's characters. She's kind of like almost like a super Wonder Woman character. She's Mr. Miracle's girlfriend, and so Big Barda becomes Big Sister, right? And then Dark Side, which some argue might be an influence for like Darth Vader, becomes Black Hand Side. So, and this is actually just around the same time doing covers for Dr. Jonathan Gales' really awesome documentary about Black masculinity in comics called White Scripts and Black Supermen. Well, we were actually starting to play around with those things as well, right? And you can see it's just right for the Kirby crackle, you know, and some of the really awkward, you know, foreshortening that Kirby would do, and the way that he actually, like, you know, would kind of hack into the human form and create these things. And actually, a lot of people haven't seen this, like, I don't know, kind of Earth, Wind, and Fire, like Black Lightning kind of inspired character. But yeah, but basically, like, using it as a tool to kind of start talking about work. So this is the part we kind of like talk about some of our influences and some of the work that we're doing now. So.
These are two of my pieces. The one on the
like the audience left.
Say it. Yeah, those I gotta look at it. The woman. The woman is an earlier work I was working on in my final year of undergrad. I'm a non-traditional student, so I just finished undergrad as I was working as a graphic designer. And I was playing with these ideas of abstraction and Afrofuturism and dealing with contemporary art and thinking of the way that I was making art. And the other piece, the John Coltrane piece, is more of a recent piece. I did that about a year ago, I believe. And I was really playing with these ideas of really pushing the abstraction, really pushing collage, playing with more of ideas of not focusing on perfection, but focusing on spontaneity and making art and realizing that art didn't have to be perfect. And so I guess after graduating, somehow I started to think more freely, I guess, about the way I was making art and not being so concerned about what I thought about art or what I believed art was supposed to be, because I was really inspired by Michelangelo, Caravaggio, and some John Byrne. We talked about John Byrne, George Perez, some of those comic artists whose lines are very definitive and very precise. And I had to actually let go of that the more I studied art. And John helped me out a lot with that. So these, my more current work deals a lot more with abstraction, layers. I think there's a piece in here, I'll talk about it when it comes up. I'm trying to think that Mother Box.
Oh yes, later on.
Okay.
Yeah.
I made a mistake, and somehow I threw away a file that I was working on, and all I had to work on was a file that I'm glad I sent John. It was an unfinished version, but it gave me a new style. In that, the only way I could actually finish the piece was to actually work on a flattened layer of the image that I had. And in doing so, it taught me that I did not have to work within these confines that I had already put on myself. It didn't have to be perfect. It didn't have to be, I didn't have to save my steps so that I could go back to it later and then fix it. I actually started to make my work harder to challenge myself. Okay, I'm gonna flatten this, and then I create a problem, so I'm gonna have to solve this problem.
Right.
And in doing so, just really came up with a really new style. It was very freeing, and it relaxed my mind a lot. Allowed me to get a lot of work done, actually.
It's amazing how much intensity you can put into a piece and how much it also simultaneously relaxes you. And this notion of like creating problems. I mean, both Stacey and I are trained as graphic designers, and so graphic designers are, visual problem solvers, who happen to use particular graphic elements to do that problem solving, right? And so Milton Glaser, one of my favorite graphic designers and illustrators, used to say that problems are my friends, because you have these particular parameters that you have to work inside of, and then you start like building these different notions of how you can negotiate visually these things. And so, I was looking at the fact that Stacey and I became really interested in these notions of like post-human, like cybernetic images, speculative spaces where we can create new bodies to exist in as Black people, or being very influenced by like what's been called, Afrofuturism, or the ethno-surreal, or even what I've been kind of dabbling with and recently called the ethno-gothic, this notion of like gothic speculative spaces where you can create these new ways of imagining what we've been calling this product called Blackness, right? And so you hear me just kind of look at some of the connections between, you know, Stacey and my work. This is from a series of cybernetic images that I did called Matters of the Fact. And so this other piece from the Master Black series, right? Yeah, that Stacey's been working on for his own art book. And as you can see, we're both dealing with these notions of like the cybernetic and the you know, the post-human to a certain degree, but in a very different way, you know, as far as like stylistic rendering and the formal constraints is around how we're working. And by the way, both of us work digitally primarily. I mean, we're both trained as like, you know, illustrators and commercial artists, like, and a lot of stuff is like hand done, but also, you know, a lot of it's, you know, in the computer too. People always ask about that too. So. What do you want to talk about this?
This is this piece right here called First Contact. This was our first test for Black Kirby. And this was, the lines, the pencil lines are from my Master Black collection. And I gave it to him. I actually sent him all my sketches and let him choose, and he picked and played with these ideas. And from that, it actually started to formulate how we were going to work together for Black Kirby.
Right. I really enjoy it because, I mean, you see like the power of the line that Stacey uses, like almost is like one line. You know, it almost feels like he doesn't almost like lift his pen sometimes.
Right. And yeah, I do play with those contour lines and making everything connect, and I actually do that. Yeah.
Right.
It is not all one line. But
right, I know. I mean, it just feels like it sometimes, especially the way like kind of drops it down to the signature and that kind of piece. So, you know, it feels really cool. And I don't know, it just felt really natural to start working that way, working with Stacey on these pieces. And again, we started to like really learn how to trust each other, you know, as collaborators, you know. And